Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Radio KBE. This is going to be another live stream because it's much more engaging in that manner. And so, just going to wait for people to filter in here and we'll go from there. Just going to give it a few minutes, let folks filter in here. And then I'll jump into this. Test this out. And so we've got. Let me share my screen so you guys can see what we will be covering. There we go. No, not that. There we go. Alrighty. So welcome everybody to another episode of Radio KBE. I am going. The title of this, episode is just about the most latest sort of extension talks that the Lakers have had with LeBron and just kind of everything that has been discussed so far with the team and stuff like that. And so, the extension talks are something that are obviously something that's on everybody's mind. It's an important thing. But one of the things that I think is equally important or just kind of important to discuss is some of the stuff that's come out of the extension talks, because I think it's been really interesting. And as always, if you guys want to leave comments, you're always welcome to do that. And if you have questions or stuff like that, I'll try and we can, talk about it and stuff like that as we go through it. If you want to leave comments. One thing I was going to suggest is that if you're watching this on Periscope or whatever it is that I think Twitter uses, I may not be able to see your comments. So if you opt to go in through the YouTube channel, you can use a little picture-in-picture function on YouTube, and you can still keep scrolling through Twitter like you normally do, and still hear my voice in the picture-in-picture function and comment if you want. So I don't know how StreamYard works when it comes to this. So if you're always welcome to leave comments or whatever, or you can always DM me questions or something like that if it comes up. But I thought maybe what we could do is just sort of discuss what's going on with this extension with Braun, and the stuff that we sort of heard so far, and then on top of that, just kind of discuss some small pieces of information that came out of the article from Chris Haynes. So he starts off just sort of talking about Genie Bus and stuff like that, and just the importance of this sort of runs promo for the new program or the new show that's coming out. So that was fine. So after you get through all that sort of stuff and the legacy stuff that's being talked about, we start getting into sort of the meat of the conversation, which is, the details behind LeBron's extension conversation. And surprisingly, not surprisingly, I guess it depends on just kind of how you look at it. Surprisingly, a big part of the conversation, from what it's being reported here, the hour-long meeting, which, interestingly enough, an hour seems like a long time. For me, I would just think, Rob probably just goes and says, what kind of contract do you want? What do you want us to do? And then that's pretty much it. Shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. But, of course, There's probably many more things to discuss. So um, I thought it was interesting that one of the things that was one of the things that was brought up was just kind of LeBron wanting to hear the strategies. And what it says here is that he expressed concerns and heard strategies because he doesn't want the same thing that happened last season to happen this season in Darvin Ham's first year. And so the interesting part is this: it's LeBron guiding the conversation, and it's not that him guiding the conversation is the problem or a concern. It's that it would, because we know that he would have concerns, right? Like he wants to win a championship, so that makes a ton of sense. But the part that's sort of interesting about all of this is that he's leading, like that's the leading talking point of the conversation. Like, what are we doing to make this team better? So there's two ways of looking at that, right? Like if you're in a negotiation period where you're talking about extensions and stuff like that, and your star player, that's the first thing he leads off with. There's, in their minds probably, or in the star player's mind, if you're the front office, you're probably thinking to himself, well, he must be still committed to this team because he's not looking to, like, he's talking about strategy. He's not even talking about extension stuff, right? And for the most part, like everybody's known, fans included, everybody's known exactly what extension options he has. He can either not take an extension, he can add 1 year, or he can add 2 years, the maximum of 2 years because of the CBA rules. And those 2 years can come in the form of being fully locked in for 2 years with no options, or it can come with a player option, which is what I think most people have thought, especially with him wanting to go and play for his son, or not for his son, with his son potentially and stuff like that. But I think I think that's a good thing that the Lakers sort of got into the conversations about strategy and all that sort of stuff when it came to like all of these, like this conversation in general. But I think one of the things that's very interesting that he discussed or that he's bringing up is this idea of consistent competitiveness and cohesion. And I think if you go back and you listen to a lot of the exit interviews and stuff like that went on, if you like really listen to them, I think everybody was hyper focused on just what the exit interview that was with, like Russ and stuff like that. But LeBron alluded to having different closing lineups so many different times in games that they never developed any sort of consistency. They also talked about injuries and stuff like that. And then obviously COVID affected the team like during the middle part of the season, that affecting their starting lineups and their rotations. Some of that stuff is out of their control, but the closing lineups weren't necessarily out of anybody's control. But that lack of consistency was something that I thought was him bringing it up in this conversation, I think is important, because if there's a quality about Darvin Ham that I think has probably not been talked about enough, is that though in nature he's a blue, like he was in the league as a role player, as a blue collar role player. Like one of the things that I think I've enjoyed the most, and I'm optimistic about, is the Lakers sort of returning and rostering players that care about doing the small things in order to win it, to win games. We wouldn't hustle for rebounds, 50-50 balls, depending on who was on the floor, they would go after them or they wouldn't. There wasn't a sense of, and this is not even just comparing it to the championship season, or last season, 2 seasons ago. This is comparing it to like just watching good basketball teams versus not good basketball teams. And it's never just like one guy or a couple guys that end up doing that. I think my biggest concern has always been that last season that team didn't do the small things that you need to do. We never gave ourselves extra possessions. If anything, it was the opposite. We would give the opposing team extra possessions. There were games where we would give up like 3 offensive rebounds on the same exact possession. And that's a brutal way to play basketball. And that's a brutal way to be successful in any degree. And I think one of the parts that LeBron is trying to emphasize or is concerned about, this consistent competitiveness, that has to happen from possession to possession. And that matters. And I think we are trying to roster guys that want to do that. Not guys that feel that they deserve to have the opportunity to do it, more like guys that feel that they need to earn the opportunity to be able to do it. And so they'll do those sort of small things that are necessary for the Lakers to be successful. And I think that bleeds into the mentality of the rest of the team. Like a blue collar mentality from your role players doesn't fall on deaf ears. Like if you've ever played basketball and you see a guy on your team working extremely hard, no matter if you score all the points for your team in a pickup game, like if you see them scrapping to try and help you win a close game, you're almost naturally inclined from a competitive standpoint to do the same thing. And I feel like there wasn't that last season. I think there were a lot of guys on the roster last season that both star and role players that felt that they had already earned their stripes and they didn't need to do the small things in order to be successful, and that they could just sort of get by on the things that they've been known to do and established to do or whatever it is. And I think that's what led to the lack of accountability and then the lapses, the bad chemistry, all that sort of stuff that went on with the team. So those things matter, like, and I think the Lakers, with some of the initial signings they've done, they're trying to address that. They want the guys that are willing to scrap and do stuff in order to be successful from possession to possession. So I think that stuff matters. And I think Darvin Ham is a good coach for that, because that was the sort of role that he had to be in order to be successful in the league. And that mentality from a coach is important, because that's the emphasis. The small things are the emphasis. And, as we continue reading through this, like, you can read it right there. It says, Ham agreed with James, who reiterated that his main objectives are to hold everyone accountable and foster an atmosphere of selflessness, sources said. So naturally, Lakers fans probably reading that sentence, like, they get their, a smile gets put on their face, because there's only one person they're probably thinking of that this sentence is about. But again, if you've watched that team last season, there were times where we were just watching players not do anything, like not box out. And it wasn't just one guy, it was multiple guys. It was guys whose responsibilities were to box out or to help side rebound or to do those small things, and they just didn't do it. And so that stuff matters. And I think Ham is going to try and enforce that. He's going to make that a requirement, basically, to get minutes. So if we continue reading, it says, Ham, referring to Ham, he voiced that defensive tenacity needs to be picked up all across the roster, and also forewarned that players would have to play new roles. And if he sensed reluctance, he wouldn't hesitate to remove them from the game. So again, that whole paragraph, I'm sure anybody who's probably talked about this article on their Lakers related channel has basically more or less said that this entire paragraph is about Russell Westbrook. But again, I don't think it's just one person. I think he's talking about everybody that's actually on the roster. There are many players on our roster last season that did not have any defensive tenacity. To be fair, I think some of them were put in a position where they were being asked to do something that they had never done in their entire careers. And they just, at some point they're probably like, you know what, I can't do this. I'm just going to do what I'm good at, and do what I'm asked to do to the best of my abilities. But I don't think the entire team played very good defense. I think for certain segments, for certain stretches of basketball, it was like that. But there was always a point of diminishing return, right? Like Anthony Davis can save your defense 5 to 6 plays a game. But once you start getting into him having to save 7 plays, 8 plays, 9 plays, and then he has to put up 25 a night, that's not reasonable to expect somebody like Anthony Davis to do. If you look at some of the best defensive players in the league, the guys that win those specific awards, like, just think about what their roles are on offense. How much offense is Draymond expected to play? How much offense is Rudy Gobert expected to play? Those are the two guys that are considered premier defensive players. Ben Simmons, before the whole fallout with Philadelphia, was considered one of the best defensive players, one of the most versatile can defend 1 through 4, 1 through 5, depending on who's. How much offense was he involved in, like in terms of scoring, and not just being a facilitator? And so I think last season we relied very heavily on schemes and stuff like that and expecting Anthony Davis to do a lot, and that wasn't a reasonable way to do, because it would work for a while, but then eventually, I mean, he's human, right? So he's going to get exhausted. So it's not reasonable to expect him to have to clean things up and also have to be an extraordinary offensive player on the other side. We want to find a balance of that, and in order to find that balance, everybody has to sort of pitch in. So it is interesting. I think it is good that it's being reinforced that these are points of focus when it comes to just kind of the conversation going on. So this very next sentence, which is the first sentence of this paragraph, was very interesting to me, and I thought about it a lot, and I thought about compiling a bunch of tape, and I've already started compiling some tape, and I thought about compiling tape on Giannis and trying to really figure out. And it's not just Giannis. The other guy I tried to compile tape on was Al Horford back during his days with the Hawks. I'm trying to figure out what Darvin Ham means when he says that he wants to have the offense run through Anthony Davis, because it's not so much that Anthony Davis is incapable of having the offensive run through him. It's just that I think there is a limited ceiling to how much offense you can run through him the way Frank Vogel was using him. And I think the main reason for that is because, there is a clear skill deficit that Anthony Davis has as a passer, as sort of a playmaker for his teammates. And when you combine that with the sort of real estate that Anthony Davis was trying to take up, where he was trying to operate from on the offensive end, I think it made it much more difficult for him. And so let me just read the sentence. So it says basically here that, furthermore, the first-year head coach said one wrinkle he will implement and stick with is having the offense run through Anthony Davis. And James concurred, sources said. The team has been encouraged with Davis's offseason progression and believe he'll be in optimum shape to avoid serious injuries and carry a heavier load. So there is definitely a subsection of this fan base that is concerned about Anthony Davis's lack of availability these past 2 seasons. It's genuinely been a problem. And me personally, I do think it's a problem, and not in the sense that like it's his fault. I think it's a problem in the sense of we have to be a very smartly constructed team in case we lose Anthony Davis for anything, for any reason, whether it's because somebody fell into his leg or because, he sprained his own ankle, whatever it may be. And last season was a very, very clear indicator that we didn't do a good job preparing for that specific situation. I would say that maybe our championship season, we were a little bit more prepared, but we probably wouldn't have been if we were a little more prepared because we had Kuzma, and Kuzma was a decent stopgap, not defensively, but at least offensively from a scoring standpoint, being complementary to LeBron if he had to play the 4 spot next to him. But obviously Kuzma wasn't there this past season, and the Lakers thought that Carmelo could fill that spot. But Carmelo was not the defensive player that Kuzma was. And Kuzma wasn't initially that way, but he grew into becoming a much better defensive player. And also style of play. Like Carmelo's style of play isn't like it's not like Kuzma's also. It's not as inclusive, or Carmelo doesn't cut. It's very purely give him the ball and let him ISO and stuff like that. So a lot of smaller things that made caused issues and stuff like that for them. So I understand the concern about his health being an issue. I think his lack of availability is what's leading to LeBron getting hurt. Not in that it's his fault, but just that because it's like a combination of Anthony Davis's lack of availability, the Lakers' poor roster construction, and then the heavier burden that's being put on LeBron as a result of it because of that lack of roster construction. And then obviously our second best player going down. So that is a big deal that I think our front office didn't pay attention to last season, and that caused an issue. So the Lakers are being optimistic that Anthony Davis will be in better shape is good. Like that's cool. But we have to actually see it. It doesn't mean that he's just going to be in better shape, and I think that'll matter a lot. But the interesting part of this entire paragraph is just the discussion about um, having the offense run through Anthony Davis. See, the thing is that if he's running the offense through Anthony Davis, that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to see more post ups. I think that's been like the general initial response to him, to that statement. And I don't think that's what Darvin Ham is alluding to. Obviously, we don't have any detail. This is just in writing form. So I've been running tape, and I've been compiling tape of shot selection, and I've been compiling tape. Really, what I've been trying to compile tape on is utility. Like that's the best word that I can come out with. That's the word that I've been trying to like introduce to the fan base, or like use with folks in the fan base. If there was one thing that I think Frank Vogel's philosophy and some of his schemes is that it didn't get, and again, this may have been the case because of the roster, and it could have been because of any other reason. I think Frank Vogel's scheme involved players playing very specific roles in order to be successful. But I think a trade-off of doing something like that is that you reduce some of the utility of the player. So I'll give you an example. Kyle Kuzma is a perfect example of this. Not only was he buried in the depth chart, right? Like Kuzma couldn't, he was never going to start over Anthony Davis. He was never going to start over LeBron unless one of those guys was hurt or taking a rest day. And then maybe Frank Vogel would close games with him at the end of games. That's only if Anthony Davis was going to play the 5. So there was too many competing interests there. But Kuzma had so much more utility as a player than just being a guy who runs up and down the floor, runs the corners up and down the floor, and just shoots corner threes or shoots, strictly being a 3-and-D guy. Our fans knew that because when we watched him play his rookie year, we saw him cutting, we saw him do some post-up stuff, we saw him drive on guys, taking dribble handoffs. So that stuff all went away to some degree when we made the Anthony Davis trade, and that's fine. You have 2 star players, you run it through them. It is what it is. But that lack of utility caused issues for a guy like Kuzma. And now Kuzma goes to a team like the Wizards where he has a little more freedom to fail, and he has a little more freedom to kind of play what's comfortable to him. And you see now all of his utility usage goes up so high. So now he looks like a productive rebounder. He looks like a productive slasher when he doesn't have the ball in his hands, on top of whatever his normal scoring prowess is. So now you have teams around the league looking at him like, oh, maybe this guy can actually be a productive wing on our roster, maybe as a starter or as a guy who plays 32 minutes a game and stuff like that. And I think that's something that was an issue. But I think Darvin Ham's approach, and it's a general approach with the Bucks do, with what Mike Budenholzer does, is I think the whole 4 out 1 in thing is it's all good and stuff like that, and it's good for the alignment and spacing and all that sort of stuff, especially if we have shooters. But I think Darvin Ham is going to encourage his players, and this happens because he's a blue collar coach. He recognizes the small things that you need. I think he's going to recognize, I'm hoping, and he's going to recognize how much more utility he can get out of Anthony Davis. We never really ran a lot of dribble handoff actions with Anthony Davis. He's probably one of the best rim runners in the league. He has great hands. He finishes above the rim, around the rim. He's excellent. But we never really did much with it. And, obviously we could run the LeBron Anthony Davis pick and rolls and whatever small guard Anthony Davis pick and rolls. We ran that maybe a little bit, maybe not enough. Who knows? But there were so many different actions. Like we never even used Anthony Davis as like an off-ball screener when the plays weren't being called for him, and then use LeBron as the trigger man or the passer and stuff like that. So those sort of small things, like we would do it every now and then, but just not enough. And so when I think about the missed opportunities because of the schemes and the offense that we were running, I think to myself that Ham is looking at Anthony Davis and saying, I can get more out of him in a way that helps the team be better on offense and be better on defense. Oh, this is offense related, so be better on offense. And that could be using him as an off-ball screener. That could be using him in DHO more often. That could be, a myriad of things like in using him. That could involve not putting him in that left side of the court every single time he comes down the court. It could involve having him bring up the ball and having, wings with more space or shooters with more space on the side for them to run actions or screens for each other. And maybe have Anthony Davis be the guy that makes those passes to the back cuts or the guys who run rub cuts or curl cuts and stuff like that. So I think that sort of utility matters, because one of the issues that AD has always had is it's not that he's not a good passer. Everybody who knows his history knows that he grew up playing point guard, and that's why he has some of the ball handling skills that he has before he had the growth spurt before he got into college and stuff like that. Or his last year of high school, I think is what it was. So it's not that his ball handling ability is not there at his size, or that he's just straight up is a terrible passer with his timing and stuff like that. I think the issue is he's always been used in a way, and I'm sure some of it has to do with what he's comfortable with. Like, he's always been used as a passer out of the post. And that's not easy to do, to be a passer out of the post. Historically, some of the greatest passers in the NBA have been incredible passers, both face up and out of the post. No better example than LeBron. You see it with guys like Nikola Jokic, stuff like that. But I think Anthony Davis' strength as a passer comes from when he's face up, when he can see the entire floor and figure out which direction he wants to go in, whether he wants to attack downhill, whether he wants to post up, whether the play call is to set somebody else up for a jumper, whatever it may be. And I think in Vogel's offense, again, may not be just because of Vogel, maybe because of that was where Anthony Davis liked to operate out of. Like, everything was on one side of the court. So you were already limited because you couldn't run the baseline. And if you tried to spin baseline, they may double him, or teams would come from the same side wing and try to press down on him and basically constrict his real estate of where he could operate from. And one of the things that I think I've seen with the offense when Giannis plays the 5, even sometimes when he's playing the 4, he's usually at the top of the key, right? Like, he's not deep on the left-hand side. And if you look at Giannis's jump shot selection, where he takes his jump shots from, not where he makes them from, because that's two different things, but where the volume of his jump shots come from, they're around the free throw line area. So he's face up, seeing the entire court. Giannis is an incredible passer at his size. He has incredible ball handling skills for his size. So there's a skill gap that he has over Anthony Davis. But that doesn't mean that Anthony Davis can't close the gap or catch up to that gap. It's just recognizing how good he is at it. If he's not good at reading double teams out of the post, is he better at reading double teams when he's face up? Is he better at reading the floor when he's on this side of the court, when he's in the middle of the court, when he has a chance to walk it up from half court if he's the one bringing the ball up the court? Those sort of small things matter in basketball. And I don't think Darvin Ham is going to run the offense through Anthony Davis more in the manner of giving him more touches in the post. I think he's going to try to run him through the offense more by changing the geometry of where he operates out of. I think he's going to try to give him the opportunity, and this is speculation, so I could be completely wrong. I think he's going to try to let him come up the middle of the floor and be able to read everything that's on the floor in front of him, as opposed to having him come down the floor, be the first guy that gets all the way down, sit on the very left low block, and just basically be parked there the entire offensive possession, right? Because teams load up on the paint. They know which direction Anthony Davis is coming from, right? So they know that AD is either going to take 2 hard dribbles on the inside, try to make a reverse spin to get a layup, or he's going to face up and he's going to drive baseline and try to get his right side shoulder on the inside of the big man to try and get a layup or a dunk. And teams are prepared for that. because when they watch tape, they see that's how he operates. So I wonder if, if his jumper improves, typically centers won't press him all the way up to the free throw line. He can walk into that free throw jumper. That's assuming his jumper is there, obviously, and it improves from where he's at. He has been, contrary to the past couple of years, he's actually been a good free throw line, like a good free throw shooter. There's no reason for him not to be capable of knocking down a decent jumper from that range, especially if he's in rhythm and stuff like that. And so I think that's how they're going to run the offense through Anthony Davis. I think they're going to try to use him more as a DHO guy for his teammates like Lonnie Walker, for Kendrick Nunn if he's on the team, and Talon and those guys, for Austin Reeves. And then I think he's also going to try to change where he approaches the floor from. I don't think he's going to allow him to sit in just a single corner on the side the entire time and only have him operate out of there. I don't think that makes a lot of sense for him to do and stuff like that. So I'll be curious to see. And as a written companion, I'm going to see if I'm going to try and compile tape to kind of illustrate and show you guys how it is that it works. And I'll see if I can pull some Al Horford from the Hawks clips, and then some clips of Giannis with the Bucks for the past couple of years, and just show you where they operate out of, because that's a big part of how teams will defend you. It's a big part of, well, if Anthony Davis is at the top of the key and he has a ball in his hands, how far is that center playing off him, or the four-man playing off of him, or is he being pressed? Now, how much room is behind that player, because they've already dragged a big man out? And we see that with the very best teams. One of the things that I think is going to be the next generation of basketball, the next wrinkle of basketball, is that teams are going to look for point guard centers. Very rare bunch, but they're going to look for guys that are 6'10", 6'11", 7 foot, that can play the center position, but that are excellent passers. And they're going to change the geometry of how basketball works. Instead of having your center typically be the guy that's closest to the rim, teams will start bringing that center out. So you see teams targeting guys like that, targeting guys that have the ability, they don't have to shoot like 8 threes a game, but if they're excellent passers, if they can read the floor, if they have point guard skills, but they're big, is there a way that we can utilize it to be helpful? So you see it with Nikola Jokic. You see it a little bit with Vucevic over in Chicago. You can see how Chicago's trying to bring him out to the top of the three because they want to open up the floor for guys like DeRozan, for guys like Zach LaVine. You see that a little bit with Joel Embiid. He's not necessarily the greatest passer, but you see that too as well. The Heat do it with a non-shooter. They do it with Bam Adebayo. They have him out on the perimeter running DHO, running screens, even though he can't shoot, just because it changes how teams have to defend a big man being out there, because Bam is an excellent screener. And because he's an excellent screener, it turns a center can't be playing too far back in drop coverage. You see that you see those examples with teams like the Celtics. The Celtics will run Rob Williams, but when they want to space the floor a little bit more, they'll move Al Horford to the 5. So having that center be the guy that's at the very top of the key and sort of like an offensive hub, either as a screener or a passer, that's getting more utility. And the Bucks do it. The Bucks do it with Giannis. The Bucks do it with Bobby Portis. And I think that's what Darvin Ham is going to try to do. At least I hope that's what it is. And I think that's how he's going to run the offense more through Anthony Davis. I think and if they're successful, and if those small efforts that Anthony Davis makes as a screener or as a passer, if they end up being successful, then he won't have to do as much on offense. He won't have to do as much on defense, because the Lakers will have more balance on both sides. So I'm going to be very interested to see what the Lakers offense looks like, because I think this sort of thing is going to matter a lot. And the geometry of how basketball is played and where players are positioned on the court, not in the sense of 5 out versus 4 out, versus, the split cuts, mid post, all that sort of stuff. I think the geometry of which player is standing where is going in a different direction, and the teams that are really smart are jumping on it quickly, and the teams that are behind, like us, are a little late to the game. But now we've got a coach who's a little bit more modernized in his approach when it comes to these sort of things. So it'll be very interesting to see just kind of how he plans on using Anthony Davis more, because I don't think it's just give him the ball more and ask him to crash, attack the rim more. I don't think that's the solution, because of his health, because of how teams defend him, because he doesn't get foul calls if he's going to the rim every single time. That's a big part of why he gets hurt too, because he gets worn down and stuff like that. So I'll be interested to see what happens. So after that, in this article, there's literally one random sentence about Russ. I don't know why it was even in here, but the team is also hopeful for a corner three shooting percentage bump from Russell Westbrook next season. Like, all right, that's fine. Like, that would be great if Russ is on the roster and he's hitting corner threes at a higher clip. That's cool. I just don't know why this was like. I think it's funny. The reason why I'm saying it's funny, and again, Russ fans, don't get mad at me. I'm not saying this is about Russ. It's just I don't think LeBron's sitting in that meeting saying, you know what? I think we need a higher corner three percentage out of Russ. Like, I really need that so that I'll sign this extension if that happens. Like, it's so random that it was put in there. And then obviously that was like the one sentence that got picked up by the aggregators. And so, Twitter did what Twitter does. And the Russ slander took off basically as they copy pasted that down. So, continuing to read through like all of this sort of stuff here. Again, another eye rolling part of this, like, we know, like, if you pay attention to how media works and which folks get which folks get like what access, and how many folks just kind of have their articles written for them. Like the one that I think cracked me up the most was where is it right here? This very last sentence right here. Pelinka made his feelings clear that he wants James to retire as a Laker and promised to provide him with every resource possible to compete for a championship each year he's with the organization, sources said. And again, it's like the Russ sentence. It's just like, what else is Pelinka going to say? Is he going to say, nah, you know what? Maybe we won't do everything you want, LeBron. Maybe we'll just do maybe this. Maybe we won't do something, maybe we won't do that. Like, obviously that's what Rob's going to do whatever it takes to help the Lakers win a championship, because that's what the franchise is about. But it just cracks me up because it's just like, if you read that sentence, like, my first question would be like, well, was that not what you were doing last season? Like, was it not what you were doing the previous season? Like, what happened at the trade deadline when the Lakers and Clutch Sports Group were trading media shots at each other over the John Wall trade that just didn't happen? You know what I mean? Like, that kind of stuff it always cracks me up because it's just silly. It's just like, yeah, obviously you're going to do that for your star player. So I don't even know why this is being written here and stuff like that. So after this, the article concludes with a lot of the same stuff about, the importance of winning championships and what the goal is and the focus is and stuff like that. So, and then obviously Jeannie Buss being the person that wants to continue carrying on her father's legacy and stuff like that, as building contenders, getting star players, and doing just kind of how this stuff is all supposed to work and whatnot. So I think it's interesting that some of this stuff was put in there. I think some of it was funny, but I do think that part about running the offense more through Anthony Davis is a pretty big deal. And so I'll be very curious to see how it goes. So the other things that have happened since then is there's been talk about KD going to Boston. There's been talk about KD now being interested in Philadelphia. And then after that, there's been stuff about there's been stuff about, like, I think today Rick Bucher's been getting obliterated on the timeline like 2-3 days in a row. He said something about Ben Simmons and leaving group chats. It's Rick Bucher, so I don't know why we pay so much attention to him. But I think this morning I saw something about Rick Bucher saying that Kyrie wanted what was it, that he doesn't have to play more than 60 games, and that also he doesn't have to shoot, what was it? He doesn't have to play back to backs or something like that. So something, something that most contracts probably don't have built in, like most franchises are trying to keep their star players at 60 games, not because of their contractual obligations, but just because players are getting hurt because of the pace of the game and style of play, and just what's going on. So it's like, I wouldn't be surprised if LeBron, if he's fully healthy the entire season, I wouldn't be surprised if LeBron doesn't play more than 65 games this season, even if he's fully healthy. Same thing with Anthony Davis. I wouldn't be surprised if they take designated rest days and they don't play for more than 65 games or something like that. If they get off to a really good start at the beginning of the season from the schedule, they'll have room to maybe lose games if they're if they're a playoff team and they're not worried about getting dropping into the play-in and stuff like that. Very similar to what happened with the year that we won the championship. We got off to such a hot start that we really, we could afford to lose all of those bubble games. Like, it didn't make a difference. We just had to win like one of them, and we clinched the 1 seed, which really didn't even matter because we were playing in a bubble the entire time. There's no home crowd that was really there. So like that kind of stuff is just kind of, I think it's sensational and stuff like that. And if you guys, I don't know where Kevin Durant's going to end up. If I had to take a guess, I think the Nets are going to trade Kevin Durant to whichever team gives them the best package without pushing them back significantly as a competitive franchise. And so it's a tough situation for them to be in, because the three teams that probably really want to try and get Kevin Durant, not really, but are interested in getting Kevin Durant, are probably, from what we've been told, the Celtics. We've also been told like the Heat have been sprinkled in. So the Sixers were recently sprinkled in. People are speculating because of him hanging out with Harden or something like that. That's what's supposed to happen. That they want to join back up again together. And then the Raptors are another team. And obviously the Suns are another team. See, the problem is that any four of those teams that are on the East Coast, if you don't get back a competitive enough package, then the Nets, and let's say that the Nets know that they're going to move Kyrie, right? After they move KD, speculatively, the concern becomes that you're strengthening a team in your own conference and then possibly in your own division that could end up pushing you further down. So their picks aren't their picks, right? Some of those picks go to Houston. So they need to have a competitive enough roster like 2, 3, 4 years out, right? So if you trade for Jaylen Brown and then Jaylen Brown decides to leave anyways because he doesn't want to extend with Brooklyn, now you're in trouble, right? Like those sort of things matter. And for GMs looking forward, they have to account for stuff like that. So if there's an offer on the table that involves Jaylen Brown versus, who would the Sixers even offer? Like Tobias Harris is on a short-term contract. Like, you don't know if you're going to be keeping him long-term. But if the Raptors offer you Pascal Siakam, Raptors fans, if you see this, I know you guys love him. I'm not saying that you guys should trade him. I'm just giving an example. If Pascal is signed for more years, maybe Sean Marks is weighing between the two. Like, can he re-sign Jaylen Brown? Would Jaylen Brown stay? Versus, I have Pascal Siakam locked in for an extra year or however. I don't know how much longer he has. Same thing, like, if you get back a package, if next to star player you're getting back role players that will extend, right? The Raptors offer you OG and they offer you Gary Trent Jr. Like, well, those guys have 1+1s or 2+1s, but there's a big clutch client already on the Nets with Ben Simmons. Those two players probably fit in well if you decide to play, 5 out, 4 out, or something like that. Sean Marks may feel more inclined. I can pay these role players to still have a competitive enough roster to not lose those picks to Houston or whatever it may be, or make them, unappealing to Houston for pick swaps or whatever it is. So those sort of things matter. I don't know where Kevin Durant's going to end up. I would guess to be honest. Like I think the Nets probably want to trade him out of the conference, but I think it's really just going to come down to who has the most competitive offer. And that part about Kevin Durant, that was the other news that dropped about Kevin Durant um, going out and saying it's either him or the GM and Steve Nash and the coach, and then Joe Tsai going out and Joe Tsai posting a tweet just later in the day and stuff like that. I don't think that situation's tenable. Like I don't know I don't know what else you could possibly do to make that situation any worse than it is. I think that specific report coming out and the response to that report from Joe Tsai, I think that's again speculating, but that's a little telling, right? Like it almost seems like that Joe Tsai probably didn't know that report was coming out. And so he felt the need to stand his ground and stuff like that. And so he just did it in the way that everybody would see it, which is the same way that report came out. If Joe Tsai found out about that report the same way you and I did, because it hit the Twitter, then Joe Tsai responded in the same fashion, and that's by doing it on Twitter. And I think that's basically Kevin Durant, and I think some people have said that. Like, I don't think he's going to show up to training camp. Like he's pretty much said, I don't like the GM, I don't like the coach. I would be very, very surprised to see him show up in training camp to listen to the coach. I've never seen that happen. Like I've never seen those sort of situations be reconciled. And so I don't know if KD can tank his value any further, or his value can be tanked any further than it has now. But I think he's going to try and accelerate the urgency of getting this trade done before training camp. And I think it is in the best interest of both teams to do that, because I don't see a situation where the Nets bring him into camp how it is right now and just everything being okay. Like when Harden did this in Houston, he had requested a trade months prior to that season. And if you guys remember, Russ asked for a trade out of Houston because there was a conversation about accountability. I think he knew something was up with Harden, and so he ended up getting traded. But like Harden played basketball, but then at some point he was just like, all right, I'm just not going to do this anymore. And it got to the point where he was saying stuff in a post game, famously PJ Tucker, DeMarcus Cousins. It caused issues within the locker room. I don't think the Nets want to risk that. And so it's just, you've seen too many examples where that can go in a really, really bad direction. And people are trying to turn this into a conversation about, well, KD's not the type of guy to do that and stuff like that. And he very well may not be, but he may do it because he's tried to do things the way that he wants to, and it's just not a tenable situation. And so I think, he'll just go to whichever team is the highest bidder. And I think the deadline for that situation is probably going to be training camp. I expect Kyrie to be traded like right after that too as well. I think that'll happen almost simultaneously. I would be very surprised if there were days in between or a long time in between Kyrie getting traded and KD getting traded. I don't think it's in anybody's interest, especially not the Nets' interest, to take those guys into training camp now at this point. Also, like that Rick Bucher story coming out and then Kyrie responding. Like, again, see, they're responding immediately on social media. Like, it's happening in public display. When stuff happens in public like that, that's problematic. Like, that means that this is not something they're not on the same page, right? Like, whatever you feel about Russ hasn't said anything bad about the Lakers since the season has ended. He hasn't. Like, the most that you heard about was him not embracing LeBron at Summer League or whatever. And, the Lakers tried to whitewash that sort of whole thing with that Chris Haynes article about the phone call, which probably never happened. But nothing, like, there's been no friction. There's been nothing like that, right? People have been trying to speculate based on whatever's gone on with Russ, whatever has gone on with LeBron. Like, people are trying to speak the drama into existence, right? Like, people are giddy with excitement and hoping and keeping their fingers crossed that LeBron is going to use the leverage of an extension and force things on the Lakers and force them to take a bad deal and stuff like that. But none of that has happened, right? Like none of that stuff has come out, no matter how hard the media tries to do it. And that's just because it doesn't benefit anybody to do that. And when that sort of stuff starts happening, like it's happening with the Nets situation and their players and their front office, that's when, okay, maybe things are not good over there, right? So even if the Lakers are planning on trading Russ or trading certain players, there's still a level of professionalism that has to happen, and they're doing that, right? Like you're not hearing anything about it, and that's a good thing because that's how you operate. That's as much as basketball is about basketball. Basketball is also a business, and these guys are professionals, and and it is not surprising that ever since it was reported that, and this is just me saying it, I'm not going to, this is my opinion, I don't want to put it on anybody else. Ever since we were told as a fan base that Kurt Rambis was not going to have any, not be involved with the coaching hiring process or anything like that, like all the leaks have magically stopped. All the bad stuff about Russ is, most of it's all rehashed, but it's like everything has stopped. Like everything. Nothing bad has come out, like directly from our front office. Nobody from the LA Times is reporting anything. I could be wrong. Maybe it'll come out later, but nothing has come out, right? Even McManaman's reporting hasn't been that salacious, or it hasn't been that bad about the Lakers. Like I think he's one of the people who's like speculated that LeBron will use it as leverage, and Zach Lowe and people at ESPN have done it, but it hasn't. So if you think about it and you try to do a little bit of Sherlock Holmesing of this entire situation, and you ask yourself the question, a simple question, ask yourself, who in the Lakers front office last season had the authority to tell Frank Vogel to bench Russell Westbrook? Was it Rob? Probably not. Was it Jeannie? I doubt it. Was it any of Frank's assistant coaches? I doubt it. I don't think any of them would want to step on his toes, and he was pretty respected and inclusive. So who in the Lakers front office had the authority and the audacity to go and do something like that? To tell Frank Vogel, bench him, only for Frank Vogel to take up for Russ. There's only one person, right? This is I don't know how to do it. I don't know which way I'm looking at it, but this is my Doctor Strange and Infinity War, whichever movie it is, telling Tony Stark that there's only one possible answer to that question. The person that was doing it was the person who was probably leaking all those stories to ESPN and leaking all those stories to other writers. Whether they were real or not, those writers were going to write those stories because that's how access journalism works. But those stories are gone now. Those stories have stopped. Russ hasn't said anything. LeBron hasn't said anything. Nobody said anything. There's no angst between the front office and Clutch. There's no angst between Russ and the front office. It's all stopped. There's no angst between what Darvin Ham is saying about Russ, and there's no angst between what Russ is saying about Darvin Ham. Isn't that fascinating? And that's the point that I'm trying to make, that everything that's been happening seems like everybody's all on the same page, especially the coach and especially our star players. And so that kind of stuff matters, and that kind of stuff can affect the locker room and stuff like that. And we're seeing the opposite happen with the Nets, right? Like Steve Nash isn't saying anything, but it's very clear that the Nets front office has very strong opinions about Kyrie and now this KD situation that's going on. So, the LeBron extension talks were good. I think it was very interesting to learn. I think it's got my gears turning in terms of like how we're going to use Anthony Davis differently. I do think that there is a trade coming. The Lakers don't have enough shooting. They don't have enough skill out of their skill positions in order for them to be successful. We would have to have outlier shooting years from more than one person for us to be successful. So it can't just be Anthony Davis being a better shooter. Like Lonnie would have to take a leap. Talon would have to take a leap. Nunn would have to take a leap. Like guys that you don't expect to be good shooters would have to become good shooters under Darvin Ham. I think that's a leap of faith that I can't take, but I would believe So that's why I'm inclined to believe that somebody is going to get moved. There's also a positional logjam, in my opinion, with the minutes and stuff like that. We have 7 clutch players on our roster, 7, including LeBron and AD, and many of them play the same exact positions. And many of them are in a situation where they want to build value for themselves for the next contract that they're going to sign. Basketball is a business. They need opportunity to do that because teams do not sign you unless you have stats to show them or impact to show them. That's the benefit of analytics, and that's how it gets presented by agents to these prospective teams. So these guys need minutes, and we don't have enough minutes that need them. So some of these guys have to get moved around. I'll be interested to see what happens. So for the last few minutes here, I'm just going to try and go through some of the questions. So if you have any questions, you've hung out with me long enough for almost an entire hour. And yes, I will post this on YouTube. Sometimes it gets buried. It should show up. If you go to the YouTube channel, it should show up right there in the very beginning. Is Scotty? No way. Is he? Okay, if Scotty is also a clutch client, all right, there you go. That's also very interesting too as well. If that's true, Scoop, then yeah, we have 8 now on our actual roster. And so I think that logjam is going to get cleared up. But sorry, as I was saying, if you want to rewatch this because you missed the first part of the live stream, it'll be on Radio KB on the YouTube channel. It'll be like the most recent upload. That's probably the best way to find it and to do it. I actually like doing live streams because then I can kind of field your questions right here, and we can discuss things a little bit more. So let me go through some of these right now. So Avery, you asked, you just tuned in. So thank you for joining and thank you for watching and for your question. So your question was, what do you think is the situation with the Kyrie trade? The trade to the Lakers, and do you prefer Seth Curry or Joe Harris in a said trade? So I don't think Kyrie's going to do anything. There's no Kyrie trade happening until KD gets moved. KD has made it very clear that he wants to get moved. So it's, it'll be interesting to see where he goes. This Kyrie thing, I don't know what the market is for Kyrie. I don't know who's giving a first rounder for Kyrie, let alone 2 first rounders. I don't see it. I don't know who's doing it and making that sort of offer. So I don't think the Nets are going to take back Russ. Simply put, Kyrie won't get traded until KD's gone. If KD's gone moved. And then secondly, I don't think the Nets will take back Russ. I think Russ will go to a third team. I have heard that there's more than one team that was willing to take out Russ's contract. And you've actually heard a couple of those teams get mentioned. One of those teams is the Jazz. Like the Jazz are interested in taking, because they're going in a different direction with that franchise. Like the Jazz have been interested in taking it because they have salaries they want to unload, and they're just going to buy out Russ anyway. So Russ has his contract as a buyout, and for teams to clear out, be positioned as a third team, I think there's value there. So I think that's what's going to happen. I don't know if I have to choose between the two. If Joe Harris is like 95% of what he is or 90% of what he is, I like Joe Harris. But if he's not, if like Joe Harris is cooked, like that ankle is really bad and he's not, the shooter or the athlete that he used to be, and he was a good athlete and a good defender, I would take Seth Curry and use him as like in hands offense. He'd just be launching threes all day. So it'd probably be a dream for him. We'd still have to shore up the defensive part, because if you're taking on Seth Curry and Kyrie, like that's a very small backcourt, and that could be very problematic no matter how good the scoring and shooting is out of that. So Lakers would have to balance out some of the size on that roster and really try to find guys who are stout perimeter guys. So if it's like a Russ to a third team and we get Kyrie and Seth, then we definitely need to try and target, 6'6", 6'7" guys that can play on the perimeter and stuff like that. And, maybe the Lakers think it's Troy Brown and Stanley Johnson and Lonnie Walker. I don't know, but that'll become a point of focus for sure. But yeah, it really depends on Joe Harris's health. Let's see what else we've got here. Scoob, you asked, do you see Russ here by training camp? What percentage do you give? I would give it by training camp. I would give it less than a 10% chance that Russ is with the Lakers by training camp. I think Russ doesn't want to be here. I think LeBron doesn't want Russ to be here. I think the Lakers want to make both parties happy. And I think the Lakers are, I know the Lakers have actively offered a first with Russ to many different teams, and they have gotten positive responses back. Like, as people are like, oh yeah, we're interested in it, but everything is being held up by the KD trade and actually the Donovan Mitchell trade. Like because I think that's going to happen too. Those two specific players that haven't been traded is holding up the entire league. And it's mainly because they don't know which team is going to trade for them, if it's going to be multiple teams, how it affects the landscape, like are the teams trading for them, is the third team going to tank even further, that kind of stuff. There's too many things. But I would say less than 10%. I would, if I really want to be aggressive, I would say there's a 1% chance that he makes it to training camp. But I know how Twitter works, and this is a live recording that people can probably clip on Twitter, and I don't want to be I don't care, but somebody's going to take it out of context. But I think it's less than a 10% chance. I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. I don't think Russ not wanting to be here I don't think there's anything wrong with that. LeBron not wanting here, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It takes two adults, no matter how petty it looks to us on the exterior. It takes two adults to sit there and say, you know what, this is not going to work. I would rather they do that and be petty and not be all buddy and stuff like that in public, because they're both men and they have pride, and Russ has pride in who he is as a player, and LeBron has pride in who he is, and they're both stubborn, and they both, believe that, maybe neither of them is at fault, whatever it is. I would rather them come to the conclusion that they can't work together than them try to force something only to have bad body language and do it again. Hopefully that makes sense. So it's a good thing that both have understood that they need to separate because of who they are as players, their play style and stuff like that. Were they successful together at times? For sure. But there's a layer of this that is our front office and how our front office is going to build this team out that concerns me. So if Russ is here in training camp and at the beginning of the season, I'm okay with that. It's not like it's a loss for me, because I think Ham is that good of a coach. I think he's going to get more out of all of these guys and more players. And the closer it gets to the trade deadline, the more valuable Russ's contract actually ends up becoming, because the Lakers have already paid so much of that expiring contract. So whether they trade him now or they wait until the trade deadline to do it, it doesn't matter to me, because I think the Lakers will be significantly better this season under Darvin Ham, and just because the roster is better and because the coaching philosophy is different. So I'm not worried about that at all. But I think the Lakers want to try and go into training camp and and for Darvin Ham's sake, not put him in a position where he has to, switch gears all of a sudden in midseason because they decide to make a splashy trade. I don't think that's fair to the coach. And so I think that's why they went. It's in the interest of all the parties to do that. But it's up to the front office to make that happen. But I think the players, they know, you don't have to be. We can see it as fans. They can see it as players. Again, it's not an indictment on Russ, not an indictment on Braun. It's just somebody has to be the adult in the room, and then I would rather it be the star players on the roster. So let's see. Continuing on with the questions. Let me see here. What is this? RC25, just a suggestion for a channel, makes playlists, organizes vids. Oh yeah, you know what? I'll probably start doing that. I don't have that many vids there, so if it makes it easier for you guys to find stuff, I'll probably do that. I'm not a YouTuber. I just do this for fun. So I should probably do that. But thank you for that feedback. I'll definitely do that moving forward. So let me see. Is there any other questions here that we have? We've got one from Free Netflix. If none are THT not included in a Kyrie trade, do you think we flip them for someone else? And if so, who is a realistic target? I do think we flip them. I have been of the mind that the Lakers have been trying. I mean, we know that they've been shopping Taylor for a while now, but actually last season when the Lakers signed Kendrick Nunn with their MLE, I was under the suspicion that they were going to move Taylor last season, that they weren't going to play Taylor and Nunn together. Nunn was there to replace Taylor, but they couldn't. Taylor got hurt like early on in the season, so he missed 2 months. And then by then, it was like a whole shit show. Like half the guys were out for COVID. We were playing lineups with Isaiah Thomas, Rajon Rondo, Russ, Stanley Johnson. Like it was nuts. It's just Taylor never caught a groove. Maybe towards the end of the season when things are, when we were basically mathematically eliminated, everything was corrected and he got a chance to kind of show himself and stuff like that. But now with the signing of Lonnie, I just don't see it. It just, you're not signing Lonnie to play next to Taylor, because if you watch how Lonnie plays and what he's good at, it's the same exact thing that Taylor is good at. Lonnie's actually a little bit better, I would say. He's a little bit better of an athlete than Taylor is. Taylor has his strengths, but Lonnie is young enough, like Taylor, where you could probably build something a little bit more out of him, get a little bit more out of him, especially if you can get his jump shooting to kind of bounce back a little bit to the norm and stuff like that. And it's just too many guys like Reeves, Nunn, Taylor, Lonnie, like all of those guys, they all are going to be fighting for, and Russ, if Russ is on this roster, even if Russ gets moved for Kyrie will be on the roster. Like too many guys that are going to need the ball in their hands to some degree, maybe outside of Austin Reeves, to be successful. So either they make like two of those guys become extraordinary off-ball shooters where you can play them next to each other and they're playing good enough defense where you can play them next to each other, or you have to move them. And if they do move them, I suspect you'll see them get moved for perimeter wings, like guys that are guys that are like 6'6", 6'7", that can defend on the perimeter. You've heard the Lakers try and target Cam Reddish from the Knicks, who got no minutes under Tom Thibodeau. It would be guys like that. Another guy that I like, who just got traded in the Gobert trade. Just got sent to, who am I thinking of? He got sent to the Jazz. Just signed with Clutch. Jared Vanderbilt. I don't know. He can't shoot, but he's a phenomenal defender, and he's a phenomenal rebounder. And like when I say phenomenal, I mean like he was so good that the Wolves had him pressing Steph Curry from full court just to try and wear him down. Like that's how good he is. And and Vanderbilt's pretty tall and stuff like that. So like he's another guy that I could see the Lakers trying to target as like a high utility defensive player, maybe taking over like Stanley Johnson's minutes or something like that and pushing Stanley a little bit further down the rotation. Again, another clutch guy. He's young, still has 2 years before his actual free agency shows up and stuff like that. Those are the guys that I would hope that the Lakers target with some of those trades and stuff like that. But I think if we do flip them, it's going to be for wings, defensive wings specifically, to give us more size and more defensive ability. Because if you land Kyrie, it's just like, who's really shooting the ball when Kyrie's on the floor? If it's Kyrie and LeBron, or Kyrie and AD, or LeBron and Kyrie, or LeBron and AD, like depending on how those guys get staggered around and stuff like that. Like there's not, like nobody else is shooting the ball, like unless they're like wide open and they happen to get it. So you want guys that are good athletes defensively and can, here and there knock things down. Let me go to the next question that we have. ABD, are Ham and Vogel similar from a coaching standpoint? They are similar in some ways, in my opinion, and in some ways they're not. Offensively, they're not similar, not at all. Um, Ham's emphasis coming from Mike. Well, it's not necessarily Ham's emphasis. It's more Mike Budenholzer, which is who I expect him to replicate. That offensive style is not the same as what the offensive style is not the same as what Vogel ran. Vogel's schemes involved him creating a lot of rim pressure by using big men, their verticality, ball handling guards that can get to the rim and stuff like that. He did like to do isolation stuff out of the mid post too as well. Ham is not like that. Sometimes Ham has his guys attack the rim for the purpose of creating open threes, right? So like the purpose of the offense is a little bit different. Like when Giannis gets downhill and he's bullying his way to the rim to finish, like he's going to finish it. But when it's not Giannis, when it's Drew or when it's Chris Middleton, if he's not taking mid-range shots, the goal is to create threes for teammates. That's the difference. Whereas, and sometimes that stuff changes in the playoffs. Where I think Vogel's goal was to always try and get as many shots at the rim as possible. Which like we saw with the Suns, at some point they just said, we don't care who's on the floor. We're not going to let Anthony Davis and LeBron see less than two bodies at the rim or in the paint. Like that's literally what teams are doing. And so that's where I think they differ. Vogel liked to use drop coverage with his bigs. Ham will also probably use drop coverage with his bigs depending on who they are. But again, small wrinkles, right? Like it's not drop coverage the same way the Celtics use Rob Williams, right? It'll probably be more drop coverage the way that they use Al Horford, where he's not below the free throw line and he's more like right at the free throw line. So he doesn't give a full running start to certain guards and stuff like that. Small things like that. That's are the differences and non-differences. Let's see here. Okay, Ernest, do you think JTA can play the Kuzma role this year? JTA is a wonderful player. He is a high motor athlete. He will do what he's coached to do. He has nice timing on his passing. He has nice instincts on his passing. I don't think JTA is the offensive player that Kyle Kuzma was. Kyle Kuzma has legitimate offensive skill. I think JTA is a little bit more of a raw athlete. He has some skill. He has ability to put the ball on the floor. He can finish at the rim. But Kuzma had a little bit more finesse and a little bit more skill to his game as a player. So I don't know if he can recreate. I don't know if he can play that role, because a big part of Kuzma's role was being able to hit corner threes. So if Toscano Anderson starts hitting threes at like a league average clip of like 34, 35%, then that changes the math behind everything. Remember, the Lakers, based on cleaning the glasses projection last season, if the Lakers had been a league average jump shooting team, league average, right? I'm not saying 40% from three and 50% from mid-range, just league average from all those jump shooting areas, the mid-range and the three, like above the break three, they would have been the third best shooting team. That's how good they were at the rim, right? Because a lot of teams take shots. We prioritize so many shots at the rim. So the bar that we have to jump isn't very high. We just need our guys to hit one of every 3 attempts of their threes that we take. We weren't even doing that, right? Like we would get some very hot Carmelo games, and then, Carmelo would have a cold streak where he couldn't hit anything. Russ wasn't a very good 3-point shooter for certain stretches of the season and stuff like that. So that we had that too. So Anthony Davis was completely off the map when it came to it. So I don't know if he can play the Kuzma role. I don't think he'll be asked to play the Kuzma role. I think he'll be asked to play. I think he's going to be asked to play. I'm trying to think of somebody in the Bucks offense that he's not going to be asked to play Bobby's role. He's going to be asked to rebound in space. He's going to be asked to defend. He's going to be asked to run up and down the floor. He's going to be asked to screen for his teammates. So whatever player you think of does all of those sort of things, that's who he's going to be. That does that for the Bucks maybe. That's who he's going to be. And I think that's the right role for him. And I think he can make himself a lot of dollars in this league if he does it very well, because the Laker fans will appreciate it. So hopefully that helps answer the difference in that question. And this will probably be my last question because I'm almost at an hour 15. I didn't expect to go this long. From Andre, if we get Kyrie, do you think Reeves should start next to him? I think Reeves is a really good player. I think he's going to get a shot to start. I think LeBron likes him a lot, so that's going to help him. That's going to help like his sort of boost his stock within the team too as well. But I think Ham is going to, if Reeves is doing all the small things and he's defending better because his strength profile is increased and stuff like that, and he did. He's good at moving his feet. He's good at drawing charges. He just didn't have the strength profile to match up against some of the guys that were trying to bully him. And stuff like that, because he couldn't stand his ground in some isolation situations. I would, if we trade for Kyrie, I would suspect the Lakers are going to try and get their starting two guard. If it's like a trade with the Spurs as a third team, which is what I think it will be, the Lakers may try and grab a guy like Josh Richardson off of them and have Richardson start at the two. But if we don't end up making another trade for another two guard, like if Taylor's still on this roster and the only guy we send out is Russ and the only guy we bring back is Kyrie, I'm not against it, but I think Ham is going to see like who really cuts, who really cuts it in training camp. He's going to see how Lonnie does. He's going to see how Taylor does. He's going to see how Nunn does. He's going to see how Austin Reeves do. But it's got to be a defensive guy. Kyrie's not a big player, right? He will compete on defense sometimes, but we need some size on the perimeter, right? Because you can't run Kyrie, a 6'3" guard, and then also run LeBron, AD, and let's say Thomas Bryant. Like that's a big front court, but that back court's really small. So you need to try and get a little bit more size out there from that position, or else again you're going to be asking too much from AD and LeBron to run around. And LeBron's 1,000 years old, so it's not reasonable to expect him to do that. So that's what I think. If whoever wins the training camp battle is going to get it, but we do want it. Reeves has size, so we do want some guy that's at least 6'5" to be in that position. And let's see here. Let me do one more because I haven't. You were here last time, Ishmael. Thank you for the question. You will be the last question. Because I'm getting very tired now. But your question is, if Russ stays on the roster for the whole season, what level of success do you think we have to have in order for him to come back next year? Is it strictly a championship? Okay, so I'll tell you something I told the Temple of Hoop guys, my guys Maples and Kings. I told them privately, and I think I may have told some other folks privately. I actually told them last season that if they got Russ and they won a championship, if they didn't lower Russ's cap hit, they had to move him. Russ's ability is not the issue. Russ's ability at his cap number is the issue. That's the biggest issue. Now he's going to be a free agent. So if you went, and so now fast forwarding into this season, again, I don't think he's going to be on this roster, but let's just say the Lakers are absolutely confident. Darvin Ham's absolutely confident. It's a championship roster. If they See, the thing is that if the Lakers win a championship with Russ on the roster, not only would that be hilarious just because of what happened last season, I don't know, I don't know what his extension looks like. Like you can't give him like is it something like what Harden's trying to do? Like that's the part that's very, very difficult to see him come back the following season. I was hoping, and this is something that I've told a couple of writers that told me it was a good idea, but the season didn't go the way that we wanted. What Harden did for the Sixers is what I thought Russ, if the Lakers season had gone well, like either a championship or, they make it like a really deep run, but they're like, hey, look, we weren't healthy. That's what happens. If it wasn't the complete firestorm that it ended up being, I thought the reason why the Lakers tried to grab Russ early was because they were going to ask him to do what Harden is doing for the Sixers. that if he takes a more cap-friendly, and it's not just what Harden's doing, it's what Chris Paul did for the Suns. The Suns had a very good season. They made it to the finals with Chris Paul. They don't win it, right? But Chris Paul opts out of his $44 million last year and takes a 4/120, which if you actually look at the contract details and the guarantees, it's actually just a 375. So he lowers his cap hit. So then that way he opts out of the large single season and lowers his cap hit. But obviously the historical evidence is there, right? Like everything went really well for the Suns. They made it to the finals, no matter, whatever happened this season. So the timing of that stuff matters, right? So Harden gets traded from the Nets to the Sixers. Sixers are already in the playoffs. Harden kind of has not a good playoff series, to be honest. And, again, an important game. He doesn't play very well. And he takes a cap-friendly deal. Now the Sixers are under investigation for the cap-friendly deal that he took. He takes a 1+1 to lower the cap hit that allows the Sixers to use the non-taxpayer MLE, allows them to use the biannual exception, and they add Daniel House for $4 million. They add PJ Tucker for $11 million. I thought the Lakers would have done that with Russ. I think that's what they wanted to do with Russ if the season had gone well. But the season was a disaster. And so the Lakers don't want him there. And again, if you rewind back, somebody has to be the adult in the room, right? Like you can't bring back a guy that you said that much bad. Like you pinned the entire season on one player. That is, our fan base is convinced, no matter who says it, is convinced that if one guy is off the team, everything will be okay. Doesn't matter that we've completely changed out the coach. We've completely revamped the roster. As long as that one guy isn't on the team, everything will be okay. And when you have a fan base that's convinced of that, I don't think that situation's tenable. I don't think you can recover from that situation. Even if you win a championship, I think it's very hard to recover from that situation because again, basketball, there's a business, there's relationships. Like whatever goodwill the front office and the players had with each other, that's gone now. That can't be recovered. You can't bring that back because of the way things went, because there are certain individuals in our front office that were hell-bent on teaching players on our team a lesson. And those individuals in our front office should have never been given that power to begin with, because something like this can happen. So that's going to be all of the questions that I'm going to answer. We are running on an hour and 20 minutes. So I appreciate everybody who joined, whether you joined late or whether you didn't. You can rewatch this on Twitter. As I mentioned, a better way if you want to rewatch it is to do it through YouTube, because now YouTube, especially if you watch it on your mobile phone, has a picture-in-picture function. So if you're like me and you like watching YouTube videos every now and then while you're scrolling through Twitter before you go to sleep or something like that, you can do that instead, or you can watch it on your own time. But I will go ahead and add this to the YouTube channel. It'll be under this name, and I will try and be better at organizing my videos. But I appreciate you guys joining me, everybody joining me. And as always, these conversations are always wonderful. I spaced them out a little bit more just because we don't really have too much news dropping. And I think, there's a lot of people who do a wonderful job out there doing, daily Lakers news and stuff like that. So I appreciate everybody joining and listening to my voice as we talk about this team. And I hope you guys enjoy. And if nothing else, I'll see you in the next video. So yeah, I hope you have a wonderful evening or a wonderful day whenever you're watching this. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks.